back home in my regular studio. A little bit different weather here, so that's kind of nice. I'm going to work this week on trying to re-stretch the canvas that I started working on while I was at Gentel. Let's hope it goes well. It's going to be a tough job, but I think I can get it done. And then just sorting out, the figures, what size I want them to be, what color, and doing some refinements. And this gets to the part where things are just really starting to take shape and pulling the whole painting together. So I'm excited. With these small grotesque figures, I decided to play around with colorizing them using gouache on matte acetate. If you haven't used gouache before, it's an opaque watercolor paint. It has the consistency of watercolor without the transparency of it. So gouache creates a velvety, flat, matte looking finish to your painting, which I really like with works on paper. So do keep in mind though that not all gouache paint is equal. There are gouache color brands that are super cheap, but they contain lots of fillers, inert fillers, that lessen the color intensity very significantly. The quality brands are well worth the cost because they have a much higher pigment content level. And this is very visible when you get to laying down color on your work. So I use Holbein gouache, which I also use for my oil paint because of the color strength. So working with gouache takes a little bit of getting used to. So as you can see here, it is a somewhat slow or meditative process, which isn't bad for the type of work that I'm producing with these figures. The good and sometimes bad thing about gouache is that once it dries, you can re-wet it and continue to move it around on your piece or on your palette. So, if you put some paint on your palette, once it dries up at the end of your paint session, definitely do not throw it away. Just put some water on it and patiently mix it into this dried cake of paint, and it will return to painting consistency, which is pretty nice, right? No waste. Also, since you can re-wet gouache paint, you have basically all the time you want to fiddle with blending and refining your work, which can be an added bonus. Gouache itself is a really kind of old paint. It has been used since even way back when cave paintings were created. It's all natural, and they created something just by like grounding up dirt and putting it into a natural binder, which allowed it to last for such a long time. So it's been used, even by the Egyptians. It was a popular medium with Rococo artists. And even contemporary artists are using gouache either alone or in combination with different mediums. So I urge you to even try out this medium. It's pretty fun to use, and look at some of these effects. I'm really happy with how these figures have turned out, and it's really allowed me to play around with color. So this is my painting that I've gotten laid out. It's already got paint on it. My stretcher that you saw me kind of putting together before I left for the residency, and I'm going to try to re-stretch it. I'm going to have to do it a little bit differently, but I won't force you to view the entire painstaking process. But the hard part is going to be to make sure that I line up the edges so that it doesn't create a weird side for me, and I have to use these clamps and really use some hand power, arm power on that. So I'm hoping that I can get it stretched nicely and get back to painting and finish it up. After finishing stretching, I've got this piece up and standing in my studio. It just kind of barely fits in this smaller space, but I'm happy to be able to work on a large piece even at home, which is nice. It's not always so easy to have to kind of go elsewhere to produce your work and find the time for it. What I did was to this time, focus on making sure I got the image straight, because when you're stretching with your hands and pulling really tight, then it can sometimes kind of get a little bit off kilter, which is not what I want the image to do. So what I decided to do was to staple the corners first to make sure that it would stay straight as I'm stretching, even though I'm doing it, from behind and can't really see the image as I'm doing it. So that actually worked really well. I did the corners and then one in the center on each side, and that was able to kind of keep the image in place when I did the stretching. So overall, I think it turned out pretty well. I just have a little bit to kind of touch up on the edges, particularly over here. But I think most of the other edges turned out really nicely. That's the hard part, is just like when you've painted a painting that's not on the stretcher, having to re-stretch it is not an easy task. And also, like if I'm painting straight on the wall, stapled to the wall, then I find that as I'm painting and adding more paint, it tends to stretch even further than when I just added the gesso and the ground to it. So it gets a little bit tighter. So when I get back to putting it back on the original stretcher bars, it can be a little bit smaller than I might imagine. So I have to work really hard to pull. My hands are a little bit sore still, but you know, hey, just getting a little bit stronger. That's what we all artists do. And this week has been a little slower going, just because I had to move back from Gentel, trying to settle into being at home again and getting things adjusted, getting this piece ready to go. But I think, you know, starting from this point, I'll be able to really, you know, move a little bit more quickly to work on completing this painting and bringing it to some finality, which I'm really happy about.